This is Matthew, host of the Superhero Ethics Podcast, and I've got an ethical question for you. If I'm trying to help you not listen to ads, is it ethical for me to do an ad to help you do that? If you go to our website, theethicalpanda.com, and just click on the join button, for $5 a month, $55 a year, you get to hear all of our episodes without ads. Was I ethical in doing this? Let me know. Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. As you probably know by now, The Boys has come to an end. I have special guest Ocean back here. Ocean you can hear on a whole bunch of the True Story FM podcasts, including Off in the Film Board. He came to join me to talk about Generation V when it finished its second season. And now that The Boys is here, we're going to start the first of what may be a couple of conversations about what we thought of the show, what we thought of the ending, and what do we think of the ethical questions that got raised both within the show and around the writing of the show and stuff like that. So, Ocean, as always, so glad to have you back.
Thank you, Matthew. It is a pleasure to be back, and it seems to be that we talk about the Boys universe when the series are ending, because the Gen V end was canceled after season 2, and now that the Boys is wrapped up, I guess we will wait to talk about the Vought Rising maybe after season 2 or 3 when they cancel that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hopefully we're not the kiss of death for it.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah, so first let's just start with kind of general impressions, and there's a lot of stuff that kind of gives the TV review out there, but just, as a person who likes the kind of questions we talk about, how did you feel overall about how the show ended?
I felt that the ending, while it provided the appropriate amount of violence and brutality that we've expected from the Boys, given the track record, it ended really. I think the way I felt about it was it ended the way it had to end. They wanted to build a happy ending at the end of it, so they had to come up with a way to stop Homelander. You could make an argument that way maybe it should have ended, especially the way that the show deviated from the comics in a way that you could argue that it should have ended where Homelander won. And that would have been the ending, which would have been more of a dystopian ending of where, like, you can try all you want to, but you still can't beat the man. But I think that they, somewhere along the line, where it felt like they decided, okay, well, we want to have some type of a happy ending and be able to stop Homelander, even though we've made him into this unstoppable force. They came up with a way to do it, and then just gave people the happy ending that they wanted.
Right. Well, and I think it's so interesting that you phrased it like that in terms of it could have been the dystopian ending, because in some way, I think it was, in that Homelander dies, but Vought is back, and Stan Edgar is back there. And we'll talk about more of that in a second. But to me, one of the biggest questions is, I don't know if the writers realized that they were giving us a dystopian ending. And that's one of my biggest questions that I have for all of this. But in terms of overall, I think I would agree with you. I think it hit. Homelander clearly had to die. I think Butcher had to die. I don't think there was any real question of that. I think Huey and Butcher had to have one more final confrontation around this question of who is the canary and what does that mean. I wasn't wild about how that happened. And I think it felt kind of paint by numbers. It felt like you're right, it hit the beats it had to hit, but there was so much else that I thought we were building to that I was kind of surprised we didn't get into. And to me, the two biggest ones were, one, just like, it kind of left me wondering why we'd had Generation V, because we'd had so much buildup around those characters and who they are and what they can do. And Marie being an almost Homelander level of power. And then she really just gets kind of shunted to the side, as well as does Jordan and some of the others. And also the story of Homelander's people breaking away from him. I almost, from the time that, Red, White, and Firecracker, that's her name, right?
Yes. The one that was the propagandist of everything. Yes,
exactly. The Megyn Kelly of the Vought universe, except without turning on him in the end, except sort of. Like, I was really looking forward to some stories about, those people starting to turn on him and starting to wrestle with what have they done and things like that. And instead, Homelander just killed them the minute they had any kind of a loyalty. So we never got that. But
but their loyalty was based on fear. And so it wasn't that they actually believed that Homelander was as great as he was. They knew he could kill them. And that's what it was. So I never felt that they were really turning on him in terms of a loyalty standpoint. And I honestly don't think Firecracker turned on him at all. I think that she
Right.
was just, she had a little bit of doubt that she did have a problem with the him being God, but outside of that, it was she was on board with everything, and she never really wavered from him openly in any
Right.
real significant way. And so I think that in that, I never felt that Homelander had any people. He had some people
Yeah.
that when he was being managed by Edgar and even before that, with Madeline, Elizabeth Shue's character, he at least
Mhm.
had people that were looking out for him to try to kind of guide him in a way that he could still maintain his power, but not go overboard where people would rally against him. But he never really had people. He didn't have friends. Nobody actually liked him. He was a weird guy that had a lot of childhood trauma, that was
Yeah.
expressing itself in a way where he could never be happy or never be satisfied with what he had. And so as a result, while I don't feel that he had anyone that really turned on him, I do feel that they had to figure out a way to then say, okay, well, how can we
Yeah.
make him so bad that nobody will root for him, so therefore it is okay to kill him.
Well, I think you're mostly right there. I guess what I'm just saying is, like, to me, Firecracker is the interesting exception because it seems like she did not have fear. She was a true believer. She had that moment where her pastor approached her and kind of said, "Hey, look, we're in trouble," and then she throws the pastor under the bus. She's obviously troubled by this, and she's troubled by the "is he God" thing.
Right.
And I would have liked to spend more time with that, or more time with some of the people watching the film who are they've been Homelander true believers in terms of the people who are way out there and just as fan members and audiences, and now him becoming God is starting to make it too much for him. I think, to me, so much of that you're right. He never really has had those people, but he always thought he did. And I kind of
Yes.
felt like so much of the interesting part of the story was him coming to terms with realizing, like, his entire life has been trying to get people to love him, and at the end of the day, he hasn't. And we'd always should have been promised this idea of one day he will fully accept no one loves him, no one will ever love him. He's not a god. If he's a god, he's an evil god, and he's just going to go destructive. And I don't know if it was lack of budget or lack of inspiration, but the fact that we didn't deal with any of that, just for me, it made the ending feel very small. And like there was a lot that the ending didn't cover that we could have gotten into.
Well, I do agree with a lot of that. I think that the part that I find that I felt differently about was the impression that you have of Homelander. So I don't have the
Mhm.
impression of him that he wants everyone to love him. I view him as really conflicted in two fashions when it comes to love. One, he does want the world to worship him and adore him and all that, and he says that outwardly. But and throughout all 5 seasons, at any point in time when anyone showed genuine affection towards him, Madeline did show some genuine affection to him. Now it was much more like an aunt or like a
Right.
mother son type of affection, but showed genuine affection to him when Stormfront showed genuine affection to him. Now, yes, Stormfront wanted him to, usher in the white master race from the Nazis that she had from before, but she did show genuine affection toward him, and honestly, so did Firecracker. Show genuine affection towards him. He always rejected it. I felt that he was not only did he want people to love him, but then he also never felt that he deserved love. And
Right.
so, because anytime it was actually presented to him, he rejected that, potentially killed them. He didn't actually kill Stormfront, but I mean, he might as well. And so therefore he was kind of complicated in that way, in that he not only wanted the adoration of everybody, but was unable to accept it,
Right.
even when he got it. And that dual, kind of that conflicting duality there, makes it where Homelander is someone who can only be dangerous because he's always striving for a thing that he can't really get. But if he gets it, he wants to destroy it when he sees it.
Right. I mean, I think that's true. I don't think he pushed Storm. I'm trying to remember because he doesn't. I don't really feel like he pushed Stormfront away as much as I think that certainly he never wanted the connection, the responsibility that so often is goes along with love. But I also agree with you to some extent that he didn't. The idea that he felt like he didn't deserve it, I think, was completely true. And I guess I felt like there would be some resolution to that of him with the rejection of his son, with the rejection of the people, with the rejection of everyone around him. There'd be that moment where he finally accepts the thing that, like, he's been teetering on the edge of okay, no one's going to love me, so I will just make them fear me.
Well, somewhat. I think the rejection of the son is multifaceted. There's one about how the son was raised, so of course that wasn't going to ever really materialize that way. But also, even the way he was, I never felt that Homelander had any real affection towards Ryan, because he really just wanted Ryan to be kind of like a platform to show more about how he was great. Because there was a few
Yeah.
episodes early on where Ryan was getting a lot of more publicity. They were trying to get him into movies. They were trying to do things with him. And Homelander saw that the extra attention Ryan was getting and thought, no, this is attention I should be getting because it should be always about me. And he
Right.
didn't really love Ryan and didn't really care about Ryan. It was just more of it was a means to an end. And I don't know necessarily what that end was, because the conflicting nature of him wanting power but then not knowing what to do with it. And also, I think one part we're leaving out is Homelander wasn't bright. He was not strategic. He really wasn't even that good of a tactical thinker. He was so much more powerful than anybody else in the room. He always got to be in the room, but he never really deserved to be there when the decisions were being made or to have any power, because he was just effectively he's a dumb brute.
No, I think that's totally correct. And I think there's an extent to which it feels like he never understood love because he never was shown it. Like he had no idea what love was. As I saw it, all the people who he wanted to love him, he kind of thought of them as NPCs. He didn't like have an understanding of what that emotionally meant. He just wanted their devotion really much more than their love. And
I agree.
And let's go on with the Ryan part a little more, because I thought for me, one of the things that I thought was so good about the show from the beginning, and that it really kind of held to, is the idea that on some level there's a real similarity between Homelander and Butcher, in that both of them are so focused on the end goal that they're willing to hurt anyone else, destroy anyone else, throw aside all their other relationships. And in many ways, like their dual connections with Ryan felt like a lot of how that was being played out. And I really loved, and I felt like it was a lot of the show's kind of overall thesis, that Ryan in the end winds up rejecting both of them. I don't understand why he winds up with MM, because
that doesn't make any sense.
They didn't have a single scene together.
I didn't even think they knew each other until I see him at the end, right? So yeah,
MM is a paternal, though we know he's got a daughter, so okay, fine. But yeah, how did you feel about Ryan rejecting both Homelander and kind of coming at the end to be part of that great fight, but then also rejecting Butcher?
Well, I feel that was actually warranted. I think that with Ryan, the rejecting of Homelander was baked in the cake of kind of how he was raised, and I think he always rejected Butcher. He just understood he was young at the time, and Butcher took him over to Grace to make it where he could be safe and then and brought up and raised. And that part of it was good, but he was never going to be a part of with Butcher. And also, I never felt that Butcher really cared that much for Ryan either. I thought he kind of cared for the idea of Ryan. He was like, look, your mom, I loved your mom, but you're not my child. And all you're ever going to do is remind me of what I hate. And so therefore, I don't really love you. I just don't want you to become Homelander and then, I have to then kill you too. And so even when it was over and then he's now a normal human again, Ryan's human, it doesn't have his powers anymore. And Butcher puts out the olive branch of, hey, maybe we should just go off and, try to build a life together. I think that the bridge was already burnt, and that Ryan was never gonna sign on for that, because he could understand that the Butcher didn't actually care for him. Butcher just cared for his mom, and then even then would always see him as kind of like this idea of either stepping out or being away from us. Like you always have that hangover of, you're not my child, and you're not my child, and your mother is the one woman that I love and why I did all of this. And so it was never going to work. I think that Ryan made the right decision to get away from Butcher. I don't know why he ended up with MM and didn't just try to find the rest of the Generation V kids and go hang out there. Well, I guess maybe because, you know what, now that I think about it, the MM thing might make more sense because he doesn't have his powers anymore.
Yeah.
So he needs to figure out, how do I live as a normal human being? So I need to go live with a normal human being. I can't, I'm not going to run around with superheroes anymore. So yeah. So I think that with Ryan rejecting Butcher, that was it was also part of the last nail in the coffin for Butcher to no longer want to live. But I think that it was, I couldn't see it going any other way, because if Ryan had accepted Butcher, you would think about that, and we would now be talking about, well, how long is it with Ryan and Butcher living off together? How long until Butcher kills him?
No, I totally agree with you. And I think it was Ryan leaving him, and then even more so, or as much as so, Terror dying, his dog dying, which again I
Yeah.
thought was very out of left field, but fair enough. That kind of drove him to just be like, I'm done. I'm going to go do this thing. And, the extent to which he ever really intended to do it, or was basically kind of thinking he was going to commit suicide by Huey, was, I think you're right. He just was not wanting to live anymore.
Yeah, it was 100% suicide by Huey.
Yeah.
So.
I think the thing with Ryan is that, I think you really hit the nail on the head with what you're talking about his connection to Becca, because remember, Becca makes him make that promise of keep him safe, don't let him think this is his fault. And I think for him, yeah, it was always ever just, I can't abandon this kid, because doing it is abandoning Becca and abandoning my promise to Becca. It's kind of a final betrayal of her. And, the one time he was the cruelest to Ryan to make him go away, it wasn't genuine. It was because he needed Ryan to be safe, and Ryan couldn't be with him. And so, like, I get there's some mixed feelings there, but I think I really like that the show did this, because I think one of the tropes you often get is grumpy old person and really traumatized child are forced together, and the grumpy adult doesn't want to be a parent to this child, but eventually the child melts their heart and they ride off into the sunset and go slay the Jabba the Hutt twins. Sorry, wrong movie. But like that may be true. I mean, that's a very common one. The Professional, like there's a lot of movies that have that trope. And I kind of feel like it's fitting for the boys to not have had that Butcher never really had that moment where the kid melted his heart. And the kid never sort of felt like, oh, well, you're the closest connection I have to my mom. He like you said, he recognized this guy's way too fucked up. He's only obsessed with my mother and his memory of her, and he's not seeing me as I am. He's just seeing me through a lens of all that. And I want to go and do my own thing. And I think that really makes a lot of sense for him.
Oh, absolutely. Because again, like I said, I don't think the Butcher ever cared for him, and also I don't know that Ryan would have ever had the attachment. There's part of it, especially when I think about these characters, I have to separate my POV from kind of when I think of what their interaction was together. And really, for Ryan, Butcher's this guy that shows up. His mom does say, "Finally, yeah, I was married to him before you and everything," but he just shows up, and then when he shows up, it's always conflict and always violence and always a problem. And so I don't think that Ryan would have any warm thoughts about Butcher in relation, vis-a-vis his mom, because he never saw the good version of Butcher that Becca would associate with their life together. And so I think that it makes a lot of sense they did that. I do like that they did that and did not fall into the trope that you described, but I also think that they needed to. There are some pieces of this, and this may be part of my critique of how it ended. There were some things in the color by numbers or in what they did with the characters. It was like, well, we got to do something, so we'll just do this.
Yeah,
because they had to resolve the Ryan problem, because if Ryan is still out there, then Butcher can't die, because Butcher has to kill Ryan. But by removing his powers, it lets Ryan live, because Butcher really, even the going with why he committed suicide by Huey, there were all the other things, the Terror dying, Ryan rejecting him and all that. But I think of it as that Butcher had a single-mindedness to kill Homelander, and he never had a moment of thought of what would be the next day. I think he always thought he would die doing it, and that would be it. There was no thought of the next day. So when he kills Homelander and there is a next day, he has no idea what to do. He had no plan. He has no identity. He recognizes that all of the friendships he's built were all in service of that goal. And now that goal is there, they're going to go off and do their own lives and be their own people. And he doesn't have anything to hold on to as far as what is next. So therefore he needs to end it, because he recognizes that he turned himself into effectively a weapon. And the only other good thing he could do then is kill more Soups.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. And that's, he's out of the revenge business, and he can't become the Dread Pirate Roberts. So what else is there to do, Exactly. And that's kind of a joke about it, but in a more serious way, like I've heard, not to get political, I'm just using this as an example of how he can feel. I'm very active in anti-death penalty work, and a lot of people who are active in that are parents of people who were killed where then the killer was executed. And I heard numerous of these folks give speeches about the idea of that they always felt like that they would feel complete, that they would feel resolved, that the pain would come to closure when they saw the death of the person who killed their loved one. And of course it never does. And
Right.
and they were just like, I woke up the next morning and my son or my wife or my whatever it was still dead. And to me, that's exactly what Butcher's going through. And I hadn't even made that connection, but you're so right. I think that's a big part of why he just without terror, without his son, without this driving goal that's driven him his whole life, he's got nothing there.
Right.
And I think that's where, honestly, I felt like the show most fell down was, for me, there have been two major conflicts between Butcher and Huey. And in some ways, it's kind of the same conflict on both a smaller and a larger level. And I kind of feel like with both, the show didn't really wrestle with in the way that I thought it would. And I want to hit you with both of them. But the first one is really, is just this idea of, do you have to do the extreme step? And all show long, it's felt like Huey has never wanted to kill someone. He has at times when he had to, including his own father, but he never wants to kill. He always wants to find some other alternative. And often he's able to find an alternative. And there's an extent to which Butcher kind of pushing Huey into a situation where Huey has to kill Butcher. It felt to me like on some level that was that part of the discussion ending with Butcher being right. Did you get any of that? Am I reading too much into this?
I guess I never thought of, I don't think of Huey as being trying to avoid killing people. While you saying it out loud, I realize that you're right. But because his body count is so high, I mean, the first episode he kills the Invisible Man guy, right. But and while that was accidental and funny, he does that. The first couple seasons, all he wants to do is kill A-Train, but he because of what happened with his girlfriend in the beginning, and then also all the various ways where he's killed people along the way. I never thought of him as someone that was trying to avoid it. I think that the only time I thought he was trying to avoid it was the mass genocide of the virus.
Right.
That was the one he was like, okay, let's not do that. But other than that one, I just felt that while Huey was trying to find potentially other ways to then make it work with superheroes and humankind, I never viewed him as having a problem with killing.
Yeah,
and so
that's fair.
So I don't know that I didn't see, so I don't see that same conflict that they have with killing. I think it was just the scale.
I think that's probably fair. It's probably that I'm seeing this in terms of what I saw as the larger issue. And it's let you kind of pivot to that, although maybe you'll talk me out of that one just as quickly. It felt like the other element of the conflict between Huey and Butcher, and that really was at the heart of so much of the show, was, are there good soups and bad soups, and so we should deal with the bad soups? Or is the whole concept of soups bad and has to end? And a lot of the show seemed to be the journey of, Huey believing for a long time that you could have like the government trying to oversight the soups and things like that. But still always holding on to this idea that, obviously Starlighter is a good soup. Kamiko is a good soup. A-Train becomes a good soup, and he doesn't want to genocide them. And he doesn't have to, and that's good. But Butcher's argument for genocide is, if you don't wipe out all the soups, there's going to be another Homelander. There's going to be others who have incredible powers, even if not quite like his, who want to take over and who we can't stop. The government can't stop. And a lot of it seemed to be about that it's not it felt like in the middle seasons, there was a strong argument for, it's not Homelander, it's Stan Edgar's. It's the guys who created Homelander. It's Vought that is the real enemy. And so I kept waiting for the show. It felt like Huey and Starlighter were spending the entire show trying to find a way to say, here's how humans and soups can coexist, but in a different way, where humans are not being so horribly treated by soups and soups aren't abusing their power and all of this. And that's the argument against the genocide. And we never got there. And instead, we just end with Stan Edgar is back in control of Vought, and there's a government agency to control them, but we don't have any reason to think it's going to be any more powerful than it was last time. Granted, it's not going to be headed up by a soup, but still, it always seemed kind of ineffective. And I kind of wondered if like that last shot we were going to get of Huey's business was going to be like more of Starlighter's, like, soup training, or, something about like what they're doing to try and make soups better.
Another Godolphin Academy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But for good or whatever.
Yeah.
But and it's just an AV shop. And like I'm a big believer of like, you do your time for the cause, you fight the fight, and then you step back and let someone else step up. I have no problem with him wanting to just run an AV show. But it felt like this show was kind of sidestepping the question that had been setting up the whole time of, is there a way that humans and soups can coexist without needing the genocide that Butcher's pushing for?
Well, I think that they just, I agree that they ended up resetting back to the mean of before, right? They kill Homelander, but the world that is left behind is basically the same world you started with, but you don't have Homelander. I don't know if you have the 7, and maybe they would rebuild that. Who knows? But I think that I do agree with that was the general conflict after, but I think it occurred after Huey started seeing Starlighter, or so when he started seeing or Annie, as she'd like to be called later on. But when they got together, then he started thinking, okay, is there a way that we can coexist with soups? And is that possible? But before then, I think he was on board with the, hey, Butcher, let's kill them all. Butcher was always unwavering. We need to kill them all, but really what he had was, I want to kill them all, but the main one I want to make sure I get is Homelander, that in order to get powerful enough to kill Homelander, you have to kill them all. And that was the world that he wanted to have, was one where there are no more superheroes. We're just back to regular people being mean to people, and you don't have superpowered beings doing it. But then the from the other side of it, and as far as the coexistence and and here's where I think that the show problematically could not really get to a resolution of that, because realistically there's Homelander and what he was doing. Now, what he was doing was far and away beyond everybody else. But most of the other abuses that you saw, from superheroes to humans, were vices. Like they were taking advantage of them, or mostly things with vices, or wild sex parties or orgies, or doing things to them, or or taking advantage of them, maybe manipulating them. But they did not regularly. All the other superheroes in the show weren't regularly killing people. Now, if they did kill someone, they didn't care and moved on, but it wasn't their regular reason. There wasn't their reason for being, or anything, what they were doing it all the time. And so I think that for the show to really try to attack that, you need another season to then say, okay, well, now we need to talk about what happens the day after, because Homelander is such a massive presence and the ability to kill everyone, and willing to do it, that he has to be dealt with, even though they built many other characters. Because you do have even with Marie Moreau, her powers, being able to use someone's blood to blow their head off and everything like that. She could take over quite a few things. She's not as unstoppable as Homelander is, though, because she's not as invulnerable to attack the way he was. But that power is outsized and can do a lot of damage. But without it, because they focused everything into Homelander, which they should, because they wanted to make a big bad, and that's what they did. And I applaud the show for doing that. To try to figure out how they would coexist, really is that all they could do was like, okay, we've removed Homelander, let's return them back to what they were before, and hopefully superheroes are mostly just actors in movies that have some abilities, and that's what we're using for, and that's it. But I don't think the show had enough runway without continuing past that to really grapple with that question, because it is a very interesting question. How would you do that? How would that work? Do you have them register of some kind, or do you do the registry, or do you segregate? Do you put all the superheroes and say, okay, if you're super powered, you go over here to this island, like Australia? Do you build Australia as like a superhero colony,
for example?
Exactly. Yeah, so it's over there somewhere, or do that, or what you would do with that. And so while those are definitely, I think, very interesting questions, and things that I don't really see them as a good answer to, because at the end of the day, superheroes have too much power. If you live in a world with superheroes, they are going to be the dominant, for lack of a better term, species amongst regular human beings. And then you have, well, can you have two equally intelligent species, or two equally intelligent, because they're not necessarily more intelligent, with the exception of Sister Sage. They're not more equal, let's say more two equally intelligent species. Can they coexist?
Right.
And I guess I tend to argue on the point of, well, no, eventually I think Butcher And that's the other thing too about it would have been interesting. I think Butcher probably was right. After a while, the Supes would exterminate the non-superheroes, because they don't really need them, and so they would over time just kind of exterminate them and move on, or put them in camps, or enslave them, something like that.
Right.
And that, while that would be an interesting show, that would then, you'd be going towards what was that bad John Travolta Battlefield Earth. You do something like that,
exactly.
where you have like this more able, more superpowered, and then the regular humans are like, primates or monkeys.
Right. Exactly. I hear what you're saying there, and I think you're right. I think they could have done it this season, but it would have required a very different season, because you're right. It would have been a lot more about, the buildup of some other kind of idea. And I guess for me, it's especially because it felt like that's what Generation V was heading towards, because so much of Generation V was about people before they become heroes, before they become kind of corrupted by Vought and all that, starting to really wrestle with, what does it mean to be good? What does it mean to do the right thing? And I think you're right that the way they built up Homelander into the biggest big bad that's ever been a big bad, it sort of felt like, of course, it has to focus on the big fight with him. I guess I always saw it as, at the end of the day, he's not the big bad. Stan Edgar's is. Like the Vought, he is the creation. I mean, it's almost in some ways, I think, kind of a Frankenstein story. Like, the monster is much scarier than Dr. Frankenstein. Fine. I'm a Mel Brooks devotee, obviously. Like, the monster can do a lot more damage than Dr. Frankenstein. But Dr. Frankenstein's the horrible one. Like, the monster is just sort of this creation. And yes, you have to stop it and prevent it from doing harm. And if you can do that without killing it, great. And in Homelander's case, clearly you can't. Right. Although I would still argue that, like, I would have rather seen him arrested, but I get why for the story beat Butcher was not going to do that. But I think
see Homelander arrested?
I mean, once he has no powers, like, yeah, just arrest him, put him on trial.
Oh, at that point, yeah, no, yeah. With the problem then is you'd have to capture Butcher, because Butcher is like, look, I came too far.
Yeah, no, yeah,
I came too far. I did too much. There's no way this is anything.
It would have been a different kind of show, and I get that, and I hear what you're saying, that definitely, like, other shows have wrestled with these questions before. The MCU with Civil War and the registration. We were joking about going to Australia or someplace called Krakoa. That's the story in X-Men comics right now. I guess for me, part of why it's such a big deal is that in most of those other universes, the basic conceit is having powers doesn't make you bad. And that for an awful lot of people, having powers actually gives you more ability to do good in the world. And that's why this idea of being afraid of them is kind of unjustified. But you're right, in this world, like, Annie and Kimiko are far and away the exceptions. And I think there's an interesting world to explore of, like, is that because of what power does, or is that because of Vought? And I guess it felt to me especially like that's what the show was building to, and maybe you're right. It decided, like, with one more season we can't do that, or just Homeland. I mean, in part because the actor playing Homelander is phenomenal, and sometimes you write for the characters you have.
Absolutely. I liked him in this. I liked him in Banshee. I like Anthony Starr and a lot of the stuff he does. But I agree with what you're saying with that, and I think that Generation V was that show. I think Generation V was, because in Generation V, they're not all trying to be superheroes. They're not all trying to take over the world. They're not even all trying to get go power. They are really just trying to be the best. There's the competition inside of the school, which is built up that way. So, okay, yes, you're going to have that. And they're, trying to grow their own powers, abilities, understand themselves, and become, I guess regular is not the right term, but try to figure out how they're going to proceed in the world outside of college and interact and interface with everyone else. And I think that's the show that would have really done a better job of grappling with these issues, because it was structured and set up a different way. In The Boys, because and I'll juxtapose that with The Boys. In The Boys, you're right, Annie and Kimiko are massive exceptions to what you see of other superheroes. But in Generation V, they're not. Right. Most everybody, the superheroes, are like Annie and Kimiko, and so you have stuff where they're young kids that are doing things that are either taking advantage of people or manipulating things, but that's, you don't have to be super powered for that to happen. You go to any college campus now, you'll have situations where people are trying to take advantage of people, right? That is a normal part of growing up in that time of your life. And so I think that really what you were robbed from. I guess really what we are robbed of to get to that more interesting show is Generation V continuing, because
Yeah, that's
there
fair.
is not a big bad necessarily. Like each season has their bad guy, but they're the reason they're stopping them is because like the bad guy wants to go towards all the power and everything. They're saying like, no, let's just keep us as normal as we can,
Yeah.
right? And so I think there you were able to then structure it and wrestle with those different things. The problem was making Homelander, in The Boys. The problem is once you have the idea of Homelander, and then you're, really your two main characters, Homelander and Butcher. Homelander is this basically omnipotent god, and Butcher's entire reason for existing is to kill him. And so when that is your central thesis of your show, I don't think you can really start to explore these more interesting ideas, because you've painted yourself into this box of we have to resolve this one problem first before we can do other things. And for whatever reason, Generation V was not successful enough for them to continue it, because I think that the creators of Generation V, or the going that direction, was to try to get to that more interesting conversation, because it is more interesting. How do they coexist? What do you do? Like how does this actually try to work, and then try to figure out ways to make it work?
I think that's a good point. And I think, because part of what I want to know is what happens next. Well, how does this world coexist? And this show is The Boys, and the boys are done with the fight. Frenchie has died. Huey is retiring. MM is retiring. Butcher is dead. And Annie is retired. And I think, maybe a third season of...
I don't know if Annie's retired.
Oh, no, you're right. No, she's still off time fighting.
She's still jumping around doing superhero stuff. I think she's still fighting. She's still doing her thing.
But I think clearly what she's doing is, like, she's Spider-Man. She's your local neighborhood hero. She's not on the front lines trying to fight with Stan Edgars to decide what's going to happen to superheroes across the world. Right. And maybe that was how, once you're right, it got to that thesis you're talking about. This is how it had to end. And then the shame is that we just don't have another season like Gen V. And I think Vought Rising is going to be an interesting show, but I really wish we had more of actually, what is The Boys Mexico? Hold on one second. Okay, I'll keep going. And we have Vought Rising, which is going to be set in the past. We have The Boys Mexico, which we don't know what time it's going to be set. But I definitely wish we'd had some sort of something else that was going to talk about life post the end of The Boys. I guess the only pushback I would give is I think that by the end of season 3, and then definitely in season 4, the thesis of the show was what you were talking about. I don't think that was the thesis in seasons 1 and 2 and a lot of 3. I think the thesis was really wrestling with which is worse, the monster or Dr. Frankenstein. And it felt like by season 4, it clearly just said, no, the monster's worse. That's what we're going to deal with. But it felt like for a lot of the show, they were actually as interested in exploring, like, okay, how did Homelander come to be created? And who are the people who did that? And again, not Homelander's evil McEvil pants, not taking that away in the slightest, but still, that like the show is really interested in what how is it that corporate factors are playing in, and Vought and influencers and all of this, and superheroes as crime enforcers and police, and has that tie in with ACAB and police problems and all that. And it just felt like the 4th season was, you know what, let's just kind of put all that to the side and deal with Homelander versus Butcher.
I agree, because the other part too, though, with and I guess I would ask you that as a fan of the show, the direction I think the direction you'd end up in if you went that route with The Boys is that if you grapple with the who's the worst, Vought or Frankenstein or his monster, and then let's say it's Frankenstein that you've decided is worse, so Vought is worse, and they take Vought and destroy Vought, which really they kind of did, but then so the way to make that work is for that either Homelander would have a change of heart and start to say, hey, maybe we should figure out ways to work together. And he would be convinced of things of, hey, these people abused me and I'm a better person than this, and I'm going to strive to be a better person. Maybe your 5th season, that is him not all the way succeeding in that or having good intentions. I don't know what you do with that, but you'd have to go that route, or you basically go the route we ended up in, which is where he just took out Vought and became worse than the original idea. And so, but the question I guess I would ask of you is, as a fan of the show, if they had gone that route, if they had done the let's let Homelander change his mind and become a better person, would that have at all been satisfying to you? Or would you then look at that as like, yeah, that was kind of a cop-out? What is this, what is this We Are the World stuff and everything? Homelander was all horrible this whole time, and now he wants to do good?
Yeah, I don't think I would have believed that. But I do think there's a third option. Like I think I am someone who's very critical of, false redemption arcs, or where I
Mhm.
don't feel enough like real redemption has been earned. I think, to me, Avatar: The Last Airbender and She-Ra are kind of like the gold standard of what Catra and Zuko go through. And like, much as I love Star Wars, Darth Vader at the end saving his son by killing the Emperor, like that's not a redemption arc. That doesn't make up for all the things that Anakin/Vader has done. And I think I think anything that involves Homelander being forgiven and redeemed would have been deeply unsatisfying. But I think you could have had a fantastic show if at the end of season 3, Soldier Boy and Butcher kill Homelander. And
Oh, kill him
and
early.
yeah, no, kill him at the end of season. Like I was very disappointed when he didn't die at the end of that. That felt to me like the big writer cop out of, we don't know what to do. Homelander's become such a big part of the marketing of the show and why people like this show, that even though it makes total sense for him to be killed off by this point, uh, I think a story where he is killed off and then it's Soldier Boy who starts to go, or some other thing that kind of makes the boys realize, wait a minute, we just slew one of the heads of the dragon. Homelander was never really the biggest problem. He was the manifestation of the problem, but the problem is
Right.
Vought. The problem is the corporate culture. The problem is all of these things. Or even have that happen as like the second to last episode of this season. I think if this fight happens 2 episodes earlier, or 3 episodes earlier, and then you have a couple more kind of like what seem like epilogue episodes. And here's, I think, kind of the thing. And I think there's been a lot of discourse out there about how there's a lot of political satire in the show, but the show isn't really trying to make a big point. It's just kind of having fun satirizing things.
Mhm.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think it's important to understand that. I think that there's a way to read this ending where the show is intentionally saying, you guys got hoodwinked. You thought Homelander's the problem. The problem was always Dr. Frankenstein, not the monster. I just don't think the writers were doing that intentionally. I think they kind of ended up there, but it felt much more like just a fun little gag, instead of actually the whole thesis of the show is the institution. And maybe this is my like being a Wire fan. I always want to say the problem is the institution, not the person.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
I think there's a brilliant show to be made where the point is we killed Homelander, but that doesn't end the problem. I just don't think we got there. I don't think that's what the writers were going for. And I think if they did, there'd be one or two more turns to do to make that work.
I agree. I think though then the show would definitely be misnamed because the whole purpose of the boys was about Homelander. But then yeah, I think that I really think the problem you have with going that route in the show is that while I think what you're describing is a great show, but it was not the show that what we got at all.
Yeah.
And but I think the real problem becomes that, well, you in that show, and to really let it breathe and go forward and everything, you could see it more because you could have superheroes that would then you kill Homelander early, and then you have other superheroes that can all kill each other, right? Because
Yeah.
that was one of the main things that was special about Homelander was other superheroes can't kill him.
Right.
Whereas most every other superhero that we run into, with the exception of Kimiko, seems to be able to, you can kill them. And well, you can't kill Soldier Boy, which we didn't know that until he survived the
Right.
virus. But for the most part, you could kill them, and so
Well, and
uh,
you could disable Soldier Boy.
yes, yeah. You could disable Kamiko. You could disable a lot of them, and that was, and even what they end up doing with him was one of the things that I felt was a little bit of a lazy writing thing, which we can get into in a minute about how Homelander's powers were removed, but because you had this one superhero that could control all of the others, that you would not be able to see the system behind them. Even if Vought is the real problem, you can never see it when you have your face is someone that is so overpowered and can kill
Yeah.
all the other superheroes. And so you have to eliminate that, and then you could get to that show. And I think that is where. And I really do believe that what we lost was Generation V getting canceled. We lost that show.
Yeah,
because
that's fair.
the
That's fair.
boys can end the same way, and then all of that can be attributed to Generation V, because those characters would probably end up going more that route, and you would then see
Yeah.
that show, which would be a great show. But there's part of it with I do love the boys, and so I think I'd have to part of my love for them is to accept that, well, while I like that idea, this show couldn't be that, because this show was all about stopping Homelander.
Yeah. No,
And
I think that's fair, and I think that, and I don't know like who was the creator and what conversations they were having and all that. I'd love to find out one day, but I certainly could imagine a world where the writers of The Boys are kind of saying to the writers of Generation V, and like they're the same people or just working together. Okay, cool. We raised a lot of questions, but we're going to kind of give that to you, and then we're just going to make this show. We're really going to make this the Butcher v Homelander show. And yeah, I guess that makes sense. And I think this is where the oddities of corporate America and how TV works and all that, and Gen V getting canceled changes that. So we'll see.
Exactly.
And maybe they get to explore it in other things. And I don't know. I think right now, from what I can tell, we know very little about The Boys Mexico, but maybe that's going to be the show that's set in a post Homelander, new Vought, new President Bobby Singer universe. Let's see what happens.
Well, hopefully, if they said it in the future, the Vought Rising thing is a prequel, and I'm generally not fan of prequels because there's too much of, well, I know where this is going to go. So you have, even when you have characters that could be in danger, they could do, if they have any character that you recognize from the show that comes after, you're like, well, nothing's going to happen to them because they are alive later. So I'm not a general fan of prequels. But one thing I did want to touch on while we're near this area is the one thing that I had that was I think somewhat of a criticism that I have of the show, or something that I was curious what you thought of this, was the Soldier Boy's power to be able to remove other superheroes' powers. Is that kind of like a lazy writing, the MacGuffin thing? Because it's one of those things where when he says it, that I was sitting there going, well, wait, did he know he could do that? Did other people know he could do that? If so, why wouldn't Vought have been trying to build others, especially when Frenchie makes Kimiko do it in the process? I'm like, well, there's no way this would have been beyond Vaught's standards. They would have made 5 or 6 other people that could do this,
right.
And so what was it? They were just, it felt very much like they were like, well, we have to figure out a way to kill him. And this is what we got, because to kill him in a straight battle, it doesn't make any sense, especially when they did the whole V1 thing. So now they can't. So then they have to just kill him this way. But it seems so kind of last minute lazy, because that seems like too important of a thing to have never come up until the third to last episode.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think the fact that we knew Soldier Boy had that power, and that sometimes it seemed to work and sometimes it just killed people depending on what the plot wanted at that point. Remember, it's the same power that at Herogasm just blew apart, like killed a dozen superheroes, not just taking away their powers.
Right.
And I think I have 2 thoughts here. One is that, once it's introduced, honestly, that could have been a part of resolving some of what I'm talking about. Even just having, Kimiko be part of the official government. We're going to try and keep an eye on superheroes, or something like that, of we're going to make more people like Kimiko, so that we have people who can, if a super powered person gets too powerful, we can basically take away their driving license, take away their super license. But I think more realistically, again, it to me, another trope that I was sad to see the show fall into is that once we started the idea that a lot of this season was going to be about, can we make the virus and can we make the antidote? And even a lot of last season was about that too. I kind of knew that by the second to last episode, we'd find out, actually, no, that's not going to work. Now we have to come up with something totally different in the last 2 episodes. Right. Because that is a big, big trope. And I think it would have actually been great if it had just been, they just do finally get him the virus, but Huey gets an antidote out that Butcher doesn't want to, and that's the fight that they have, or something like that. I didn't love this whole introduction of the original V1 blood, because then again, we could make that more of that. It just felt like they were introducing so many of these MacGuffins at the very end of the season that, you're right, I think just felt kind of lazy writing, because they kept wanting to have one more big twist,
Yeah. But also I think that, and I really feel that the, beating the dead horse of Gen V being able to explore these things was that if you had that thing of where you could create create Kimiko, have her go around where she could take people's powers away, you would then have a lot of interesting, questions about, well, is that okay to do? Because people's identity would be wrapped up in these abilities. Even Starlight, who seems fairly well adjusted, at least as well adjusted as she can be, who is she if she doesn't have any powers? Like, does
Right.
that fundamentally change her mental thought process of herself, her own self-worth, her own self-value? And are you doing more than just stopping someone from being a villain, but are you actually taking away their identity at the same time? And then whether or not that is, is that okay to do, especially against their will? If someone volunteers for it, that's one thing. But if they don't, then what are you doing to them as a person? And is that a punishment that fits the crime situation? Now, obviously, if you're trying to take over the whole world, I would say yes. But if you're just, you robbed a bank, maybe
Right.
not. Maybe there's some other ways to do it, but that would have become, once you have that hammer, every problem would become a nail, and you start going that direction. I think that also is a very interesting show and idea that that has been explored in other mediums. I know the X-Men had a whole thing about that with as well, about being able to take powers away, and so
Yeah.
but I felt that his ability to do that, it just felt kind of like it coming out of left field. And I personally would have preferred the virus be the thing, because that now you're grappling with the bigger question of, are they so bad that we should have genocide, or not? And then on top of that, even if you end up with Huey finds the antidote and gets it out there, and everything is great, that's fine. But there's still going to be several million that die anyway.
Right.
Because they're not necessarily going to get the antidote out everywhere as fast as the ones that die. And then what does that mean as far as the show and how things ended and where it went? But then again, I also, that changes the show, because there's a part of it where, while all that is interesting, there is a piece of this they have to then, say, hey, well, we're going to make what is entertaining what people came here for, and people came for the hits, and the hits are Butcher v. Homelander.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think there's just, I kind of thought that it might be that Butcher takes the V1 and then he kills Homelander, and then everyone has to kill Butcher. So, but fair enough. As you said, this is the show we got. I definitely enjoyed it. There's a lot more could have discussed, and we'll keep talking about it. I think there's a whole area of just I got to wrap up now, but I think there's a whole area of Homelander becoming God in his mind, and what all that meant that we didn't even get into. So I'm really looking forward to this. Ocean, thank you as always so much for being a part of this. For people who want to find more of your stuff, where can they go?
Well, right now I'm on the most recent episode of the Film Board, where we are discussing the new Star Wars with Star Wars with Mandalorian and Grogu. And right now, my primary podcast is the Aging Moment, which is the podcast where we deal with the triangulation of sports, movies, and life. We have been on a break for a while, but because life gets in the way of things sometimes, and we are looking to try to start this back up again. And then I will be more information when we get our act together.
Yeah. Please do, and please keep me in mind for a guest, because there's a lot of sports movies I would love to talk about. I'd love to talk about the role of sports in society, and kind of how we, talk about that in film and things like that. And there's just so much to get into there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that. It definitely gives us other directions to go with the show in sports, because we'll try to talk about the sports movies and more than just did the underdog win.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say, just as a shameless self-plug, my own podcast, this podcast, Superhero Ethics, we recently did an episode on The Natural, and baseball's mythology. That was really fun, and kind of plays in a lot of what you're talking about there. Yeah. So thank you, Ocean.
That was a good episode. I recommend everybody go out and listen to it.
Thank you so much. We'll definitely have a link to it in the show notes, as well as a link to all of Ocean stuff. Of course, you can find this and my Star Wars podcast at truestory.fm, or just go to theethicalpanda.com. Star Wars, we've been talking about Maul. We've been talking about Mandalorian and Grogu, the movie that's out. Although also you can find both me and Ocean talking about that on the Film Board. A lot of great things. All of it's at truestory.fm. So on behalf of myself and Ocean, thank you all so much for tuning in. We have spoken.